When you look at a map of the Pacific Northwest, the distance between Hillsboro, Oregon, and Battleground, Washington doesn't look like much. It is just a short drive across a state line, a seemingly insignificant geographical shift. But when Zach and Tori Roloff packed up their entire lives, loaded their children into the car, and drove that route, they weren't just crossing a border, they were severing a lifeline. When they announced this move to the world, they smiled for the cameras. They stuck to the script. They told us, and they told you, that they just wanted a bigger house, more green space, a quiet place to raise their growing family. It was a perfect, polite cover story, the kind of PR statement you give when you are trying to hide a wound that hasn't stopped bleeding. But that was a lie. It was a necessary protection mechanism. Today, we are going to tear down that cover story. We are going to reveal the sickening insider reports regarding a lawsuit and a corporate maneuver that finally opened Zach's eyes. We are going to pinpoint the exact heartbreaking moment he realized that his father, Matt Roloff, wasn't just a difficult negotiator, but a man who he needed to escape from to save his own sanity. This wasn't a move. This was a flee. If you want to understand the dark truth behind reality TV's most fractured family, and if you support Zach and Tori for doing what is best for their children, please go ahead and hit that like button right now, and make sure you are subscribed to the channel. We are digging deeper than anyone else dares to go, and you do not want to miss what comes next. To understand why Zach ran, we have to go back to the moment the illusion shattered. For years, the narrative has been that Zach was lazy, or that he was entitled, or that he simply couldn't handle the responsibility of the farm. That is the story Matt has carefully curated and fed to the audience. But theories and deep dive analysis of court documents suggest a much darker reality. The catalyst wasn't the price of the land. It wasn't the condition of the farmhouse. It was a loyalty test that Zach failed on purpose because the cost of passing it was his soul. Reports have been circulating for months, whispered among insiders who track the Roloff business dealings, about the details of a specific legal maneuver involving Matt and his girlfriend, Caryn. We are talking about the alleged squeeze-out scam, a $5 million power play that was never meant to be public knowledge. Imagine being Zach. You have grown up on this land. You have poured your sweat into pumpkin seasons. You have allowed your childhood to be filmed for the financial benefit of the family empire. You assume that, despite his flaws, your father operates with a baseline of familial love. You assume that the legacy is about the children. And then, according to these insider theories, you see the paperwork. You see the black and white proof that your father isn't viewing you as an heir, but as an obstacle to a liquidation event. When the details of how Matt and Caryn allegedly positioned themselves to bypass Amy and secure total financial dominance leaked to the rest of the family, it wasn't just a business disagreement. It was a psychological nuclear bomb. We need to analyze the psychology of this specific time frame. Zach has always been the observer. He is the one who watches. He saw how Matt treated Amy during the divorce. He saw the gaslighting, the displacement of blame, the way Matt would rewrite history to make himself the victim of his own ambition. But Zach, like many children of narcissistic dynamics, likely held on to the hope that he was safe, that he was the exception, that the bond between father and son was sacred enough to withstand greed. The move to Washington was triggered because that hope died. It died the moment Zach realized that the negotiations for the farm were never real negotiations. They were a setup. Insiders speculate that Zach discovered Matt was using the potential farm sale not as a way to pass down a legacy, but as a way to leverage control over his adult children, while simultaneously securing a massive retirement nest egg with Caryn. The theory goes that Matt offered the farm at a price he knew Zach couldn't afford, specifically so he could turn around, sell it to the public, or list it as a rental and say, "Well, I tried, but the kids just couldn't step up." It creates a narrative where Matt is the benevolent patriarch and his children are the failures. But Zach saw through it. The heartbreak here is profound. When we talk about the squeeze out, we are talking about the alleged systematic erasure of Amy's contribution to that land, and by extension, the erasure of the childhood Zach had there. Think about the conversations that must have happened behind closed doors between Zach and Tori. Tori, who has always been protective of her husband, likely saw the toll this was taking on him long before the cameras caught it. She watched her husband try to please a father who moved the goalposts every single time Zach got close to scoring. The sickening part of these reports isn't just about money, it's about emotional manipulation. It's about dangling a carrot, the farm, the legacy, the approval, and then snatching it away the moment the child reaches for it, only to replace it with a contract that benefits the father's new partner. This brings us to the concept of the final straw. In psychological terms, this is the moment of cognitive dissonance resolution. For years, Zach held two conflicting beliefs: my dad loves me, and my dad hurts me. The lawsuit details the corporate maneuvering, the realization that Matt and Caryn were operating as a unified business front against the interests of the original family unit. That resolved the dissonance. He realized that the business always came first, and if the business comes first, the family comes second. If the family comes second, then Zach is not a son. He is an employee, a tenant, a liability. The move to Washington, therefore, must be recontextualized. It wasn't about finding a house with a better yard. It was a frantic, desperate attempt to remove his children from the splash zone of Matt's toxicity. Zach looked at his own son, Jackson, and he looked at his daughter, Lila, and he realized that if he stayed in Oregon, if he stayed within the gravitational pull of Roloff Farms, his children would eventually become pawns in the same game Matt was playing with him. He had to break the cycle. The map with the red line isn't a travel route, it's a boundary, a hard, physical boundary. We also have to consider the role of Caryn in this equation, and how her involvement in the business dealings accelerated Zach's departure. Insider reports suggest that Zach was deeply disturbed by how much influence Caryn had over the estate decisions that should have been between a father and his children. It is one thing to have a stepmother figure, it is another to have that figure actively participating in the financial disenfranchisement of the biological mother and the heirs. When Zach saw the extent of this partnership, described by some theories as a corporate squeeze-out designed to minimize payouts to the Roloff kids while maximizing liquid assets for Matt and Caryn's lifestyle in Arizona, the betrayal was total. He realized he was negotiating with a tag team. He wasn't sitting across the table from his dad, he was sitting across from a corporation. And that is why the pain was so visible in those final episodes in Oregon. You could see it in Zach's eyes, a dull, heavy resignation. He wasn't angry anymore, he was done. He was grieving the death of the father he thought he had. The move to Washington was the funeral procession for that relationship. He took his family to a place where Matt had no keys, no deed, and no control. But the most chilling realization, and the one we are going to explore next, is the specific connection to Amy. Because if you think this was just about Zach getting a bad deal, you are missing the bigger picture. The insider theories point to something much more malicious. Zach didn't just leave because he was hurt, he left because he was disgusted. He left because he saw what his father was trying to do to his mother, and he realized that staying silent was no longer an option. We have to peel back the layers of this onion to find the rot at the center, and the rot usually leads back to one specific dynamic: the treatment of Amy Roloff. To the casual viewer, the farm negotiation looked like a dispute between a father and a son over market value and square footage. But insiders suggest that for Zach, this was the moment the mask completely slipped off. The twist in this story isn't about real estate. It is about vindication and the realization that his father was orchestrating a malicious, calculated erasure of his mother. When the details of the corporate restructuring and the farm sale proposal were laid out, Zach reportedly saw something that turned his stomach. He didn't just see a lowball offer, he saw a weapon. Exclusive theories circulating among those close to the production suggest that the terms of the deal Matt presented to Zach were laced with clauses that would have effectively forced Zach to side with Matt and Caryn against Amy's remaining interests. It was a Trojan horse. By accepting the farm under Matt's conditions, Zach would have become a puppet in a narrative designed to prove that Amy was the problem all along. Matt has spent years trying to rewrite the history of Roloff Farms, painting himself as the sole visionary and Amy as the chaotic obstacle. Zach knows the truth. He lived it. He knows that his mother carried the emotional and often physical load of that family, while Matt played the role of the big dreamer. So, when Matt and Caryn allegedly presented a business plan that treated Amy's legacy with total contempt, trying to squeeze every last drop of value out of the home she raised her children in, solely to fund their retirement, Zach viewed it as a direct attack. He was reportedly completely disgusted. Think about the psychological weight of that. He wasn't just mad, he was repulsed. He realized that his father was willing to partner with the woman who played a role in the destruction of his marriage, to financially ruin the reputation of the woman who built the family. Zach saw the writing on the wall. If he bought the farm, he wouldn't be honoring his mother. He would be helping his father bury her memory. The deal wasn't a passing of the torch. It was a bribe. Matt was essentially saying, I will give you a piece of the kingdom, but only if you agree to wipe your feet on your mother's doormat. This is where the insider reports become truly chilling. There is a theory that part of the squeeze out involved repurposing the main house, Amy's house, in a way that felt like a desecration to the kids. Whether it was turning it into a short-term rental managed by Caryn, or chopping up the land in a way that destroyed the sanctuary Amy had created, Zach saw the intent. It was personal, it was vindictive, and it was happening with a smile for the cameras. Zach realized that Matt and Caryn were a united front, a corporate entity that viewed family members as liabilities on a balance sheet. He realized that he could never trust his father's word because his father's word was always contingent on what was best for Matt and Caryn, not what was best for the Roloff legacy. This was the ultimate betrayal. It wasn't that Matt wouldn't sell him the farm, it was that Matt used the farm to try and recruit Zach into his war against Amy. Zach, to his absolute credit, refused to be drafted. He looked at the paperwork, he looked at his father, and he looked at Caryn sitting there like the new matriarch of an empire she didn't build, and he chose his soul. He chose his mother. This is why the rift is so deep and so silent. You can argue about money, you can argue about property lines, but you cannot argue with someone who tries to make you complicit in the humiliation of your own mother. That is a line you do not cross, and Matt crossed it. We need to talk about the concept of financial abuse disguised as tough love. Matt loves to portray himself as a shrewd businessman teaching his kids hard lessons. But let's call it what it looks like from the outside. It looks like control. It looks like a man who uses money to create loyalty and debt to create leverage. Zach realized that if he signed those papers, he would be in debt to Matt forever. Not just financial debt, but emotional debt. He would be living on Matt's land, under Matt's rules, subject to Matt's inspections. He would be a tenant in his own life. The move to Washington, the decision to flee the state, was the result of this epiphany. Zach realized that his father's love was transactional. As long as Zach played the role of the dutiful, obedient son who nodded along to Matt's schemes, the resources would flow. But the moment Zach showed independence, the moment he defended his mother, the tap was turned off. The negotiations were never about giving Zach the farm. They were about testing how much control Matt could retain after giving Zach the farm. When Zach realized the cost of the farm was his autonomy, he walked away. This brings us to the climax of the saga, the Great Escape. And make no mistake, it was an escape. When you pack up a house quickly, when you move your pregnant wife and small children across state lines away from their grandparents and cousins, you are running from something. Zach was running from the toxic, gravitational pull of a narcissist who had just shown his true colors. He realized that distance was the only shield. You cannot heal in the same environment where you were sick, and Roloff Farms had become a sick place. It was no longer the pumpkin patch of his childhood. It was a battlefield where his father was the general and everyone else was cannon fodder. The decision to move to Battleground Washington was symbolic. It puts a physical barrier, the Columbia River, the state line, the miles of highway, between his family and the drama. It was a way of saying, you cannot reach us here. It was a declaration of independence. By buying his own house with his own money on his own terms, Zach stripped Matt of his greatest weapon, leverage. Matt could no longer dangle the farm over Zach's head because Zach didn't want it anymore. He didn't want the poison that came with the soil. Think about the conversations Zach must have had with Tori during those late nights before the move. They weren't just looking at Zillow listings. They were discussing how to protect Jackson and Lila from the same cycle of manipulation Zach grew up with. They saw how Matt treats people, how he treats Amy, how he treats Jeremy, how he treats employees. They realized that Matt sees people as extensions of himself, meant to serve his vision. Zach didn't want his children to be props in Grandpa's farm show. He wanted them to be kids. He wanted them to be loved for who they are, not for what they can do for the brand. The flee to Washington was a desperate move to put an entire state between themselves and a situation they found completely toxic and unforgivable. It was a rejection of the Roloff way as defined by Matt. And let's be honest, it was a rejection of Caryn too. The audience often overlooks the Caryn factor, but reports suggest she was the whisperer in Matt's ear during those negotiations, the one pointing out the market value and the retirement needs, effectively arguing against Zach's inheritance. Zach likely realized that as long as Caryn was the gatekeeper, he would never have a true relationship with his father. He would always be negotiating with a committee, so he left. He took the nuclear option. He removed his presence, his wife, and most importantly, the grandchildren from the daily life of the farm. This is the ultimate punishment for a narcissist, irrelevance. By moving away, Zach made Matt's kingdom smaller. He left Matt alone with his land, his tractors, and his girlfriend, but without the family that gave the farm its meaning. The silence from Washington is deafening. It's not just a quiet life, it's a fortified life. Zach built a wall, and he built it out of boundaries. But the fallout of this decision is still raining down. The dust hasn't settled. When they drove away, they didn't just leave a house. They forced everyone else to pick a side. And that is where we find ourselves today. The family is fractured, perhaps permanently, because Zach refused to play the game anymore. He refused to be the little person in his father's big world. He decided to build his own world, even if it meant tearing the family portrait in half. The fallout from this escape is what we are witnessing right now. It is a Cold War fought not with weapons, but with silence and distance. By crossing that state line, Zach and Tori didn't just move, they defected. They unequivocally chose a side, and that side is Team Amy. For years, the family tried to maintain a veneer of neutrality, pretending that the divorce didn't fracture the clan into warring factions. But the squeeze-out scandal forced everyone to show their cards. Zach realized that you cannot be neutral in the face of injustice. If he had stayed and taken the farm under Matt's toxic terms, he would have been endorsing the mistreatment of his mother. By leaving, he sent a message louder than any screaming match could ever be. We see what you did, and we want no part of it. This decision has reportedly left Matt reeling. Narcissists often do not know how to handle it when their victims simply walk away. Matt likely expected Zach to beg, to negotiate, to come crawling back for a piece of the pie. Instead, Zach built his own pie. He took away the one thing Matt craved more than money: access. Access to the grandchildren, access to the storyline, access to the control. Now, Matt is left in Oregon with his millions, his farm, his big construction projects, and Caryn. But the heart of the family, the laughter of the grandkids, the chaotic joy of the next generation, is happening in Washington, far away from his reach. There is a profound tragedy here, but it is a tragedy of Matt's own making. He chose the asset over the heir. He chose the girlfriend over the loyalty of his son. And now, he has to live in the house that greed built, while Zach lives in a home built on boundaries and respect. Reports indicate that the relationship remains icy, limited to polite, brief interactions for the sake of the cameras or holidays. But the warmth is gone. The trust is shattered. You can fix a fence, but you cannot fix the feeling of being sold out by your own father for a retirement fund. Zach and Tori are flourishing in Washington because they are finally free. They are no longer waiting for the other shoe to drop. They are no longer auditing their own words to avoid setting off Matt's temper or bruising his ego. They are raising Jackson, Lila, and Josiah to value people over property. They broke the generational curse. It cost them the farm, it cost them the inheritance, and it cost them the proximity to the place they grew up. But what they bought with that price was peace. And looking at their faces now, looking at the lightness in their interactions, it was a bargain. So we have to ask the hard question. We have to look at the wreckage of this family dynasty and decide who is right. Did Zach do the right thing by taking the nuclear option? Was moving his children away from Matt's drama a heroic act of protection? Or should he have stayed to fight for the land that was promised to him? I want to know where you stand. Are you on Team Matt, believing that business is business and Zach was just being entitled? Or are you on Team Zach and Amy, believing that Matt's greed destroyed the family and that escaping to Washington was the only sane choice? Did Matt and Caryn really plot to squeeze Amy out, forcing Zach to flee? Let me know whose side you are on down in the comments below. I read every single theory you guys post. If you think Zach made the right move to save his family, hit that like button. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications because as more of these insider reports leak, we will be the first to break them down. Thanks for watching and we'll see you in the next deep dive.